Starting off at number 10, we have the Russian kindergartner. Now, this story surrounds a girl who was Russian in her past life. Her mother claims that when her daughter was learning the alphabet, she kept mixing up her letters. She would mix up her B's and V's and H's and N's. These letters aren't that similar, so it left her and her teacher confused, especially since her daughter kept saying, "I don't remember those." This little girl then states that she remembers the letter H and that it makes an N sound. Then she said that she knew more letters and began to write out the Russian alphabet. Her mom asked her where she learned that, and she said, "Vlad taught me before he disappeared," and not Vlad the vampire. This little girl claimed that Vlad was her brother in her past life. How freaky! Like, there's no way that this young girl just happened to know the Russian alphabet, unless it was from her past life. At number 9, we have the daughter who just wants to go home. This mother claims that when her daughter was young, she kept begging her mom to take her home. When she asked where her home was, she said that she used to live near the water with her other family. That was until one day she passed away. She would even draw pictures of her past home and retell memories of her watching the waves. She also refers to her mom as Pa and wants to go back home to her other Mahi. Moving on to number 8, we have The Boy and the Scottish Pub. Just like the title suggests, this story takes place in a pub in Scotland. When a 4-year-old and his family stopped at a pub in a small village in Cairngorms, the little boy recognized the pub immediately and said, "My favorite place." The boy was able to direct his dad to the bathroom in the pub, which was said to be hidden behind a wall and not even labeled. Then the little boy kept saying how much he loved this pub and sitting beside the fire. But there was no fireplace, but the boy insisted that there used to be one against a certain wall. Then he continued to talk about more details of the pub and about the owner and his friend Fred. Bar staff then said that his claims were correct. Fred was the owner there, but passed away 10 years ago. Okay, wow. Either this kid has been sneaking out and partying it up at this pub, or he truly did go there in his past life. Moving on to number 7, we have the boy who is his own grandfather. Yeah, you heard me correctly. This boy claims to be the reincarnation of his grandfather. A year before Gus Taylor was born, his grandfather had passed away. However, when the baby was 18 months, he started referring to himself as his own grandfather, Grandpa Augie. When he was 4, he could point out his grandpa in photographs despite never even seeing him before. Gus would also talk about his sister. Now, the grandfather's sister had been murdered and they always kept that from Gus, but somehow he already knew this detail and would continuously talk about his past sister. Creepy. And also super confusing. So the grandfather was the dad to Gus's mom, but his mom gave birth to her dad, the grandfather? That's so weird. Next up at number 6, we have Cameron McCauley. Now, there is a short little documentary on Cameron in case you are wondering and want to check it out as well. So basically, when Cameron was 2 years old, he kept saying that he had another life on a remote island called Barra. Now, Cameron was from Glasgow, but Barra is an hour flight away, approximately 220 miles from Glasgow. For 3 years, Cameron kept talking about his family in Barra. He said he had brothers and sisters and even had a black and white sheepdog. He said he remembers living in a white house near the beach and remembers planes landing nearby. He even remembers the view outside from his house's window. Cameron began missing his family so much that he would become super upset. That's when they ended up going to Barra to find his home. When they did find his home, it had the same view that Cameron described and was apparently even home to the same dog. However, Cameron said he had a father named Shane Robertson that passed away from getting hit in a car. This is the one thing that doesn't check out. Apparently there was never a Shane Robertson that lived there, so who's Shane? Honestly, maybe it was his father from like 2 lives ago. Who even knows? We are now at our halfway mark with Shanti Devi. Shanti Devi was born in 1926 in India. When she was 4 years old, she started making claims about her real name, her other family, and her past life. Apparently, she told her parents that she lived 145 kilometers away in a place called Mathura with her husband Kedar Nath. She also said that she died after giving birth to her child. Apparently, she even had the same talking habits as someone from Mathura. Her family eventually took her to the other village and found the man she claimed to be her husband by the name of Kedar Nath. Kedar then told them that he did lose his wife 9 years ago, 10 days after delivering their son. Now, Kedar was skeptical of this girl's claims, so when he went to go meet Shanti, he pretended to just be his brother. But Shanti instantly recognized him as her husband from her past life. Next on my list at number 4, we have James Leyanger. Born in 1998, when James was 2, he claimed to be a lieutenant and passed away when his plane was shot down. Now, just like any other parent would do, they just brushed it aside, saying that he had a wild imagination. But then he kept describing accurate information. When they researched into this plane crash, they found that there was an American pilot named Lieutenant James Houston Jr. who passed away in 1945 towards the end of World War II. First off, what are the odds that he gets reincarnated and his parents literally picked the same name? Now, the boy continued to talk about his ship, the Natoma, which was also true. He would also have reoccurring nightmares about an airplane crash. His parents then met Lieutenant James's crew, who are all old by now, but they confirmed the details that James mentioned, saying that they were all accurate and only the lieutenant and the crew could have known some of the details. Coming in at number 3, we have Edward Austrian. Edward Austrian was 4 years old when he claimed that he was a soldier from World War I. He kept saying that he passed away after taking a bullet to the throat. In fact, Edward continuously would get sore throats and would say that his shot wound was hurting. Doctors couldn't even explain why he was constantly getting these sore throats, and in fact he even developed a cyst in his throat at one point. Eventually the cyst mysteriously went away on its own after Edward started talking more about his past life. He claims that he was a soldier named James that was 18 years old. He has vivid memories from his past life that he would share with his family. One day he said, and I quote, "We were walking along through the mud. It was damp, it was cold. My rifle is heavy. I remember looking out and seeing trees, and then there was desolation. I heard a shot come from behind. It went through someone else, hit me square in the back of the neck, and I felt my throat fill with blood." There's no way a 4-year-old could have made up those details, especially since his parents claim that they've never let him watch any soldier or war-related movies or shows. Next up at number 2, we have the boy from Thailand. Chennai was 3 years old when he started having memories of his past life. This 3-year-old boy remembers being a teacher named Bua Kai. He talked about his previous family, wife, and children. He said that he passed away after being shot in the head while walking to school. What's freaky is that this boy has 2 birthmarks on his face. One on the back of his head and one above his left eye. Those are the exact spots where the bullet entered and exited Buakai's head. Now, people believe that birthmarks tell some sort of story from our past lives. In this case, it symbolizes how he was killed in his past. Now, Buakai was a real person that passed away about 5 years before Chennai was born. Coming in at number 1, we have the boy who solved his own murder. When a boy in Syria Golan Heights was 3, he began saying that he had been murdered in his past life. The boy said that he was killed by getting an axe to his head. This boy even had a long red birthmark on his head. In this boy's case, the birthmark also showed the way that he passed away. Now, it turns out that this boy's story checked out. They took him to the village that he said he once lived in and even showed his family where his body was buried. When they unearthed his body, they found a boy's skeleton with an axe wound in the skeleton's skull. Like, there's no way that a kid could have just known where a body was buried by coincidence. But it doesn't stop there. The kid also remembered who the killer was and his full name. They then confronted him and he eventually admitted to the crime.
Starting us off at number 10 is Ryan. At the tender age of 4, Ryan started going around his house directing imaginary movies, shouting action and so on. And at first his parents thought it was cute, but then it quickly became a nuisance when Ryan would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and saying he dreamt he was in Hollywood and his heart exploded. The doctor boiled it down to night terrors and his parents stayed patient with him. Then one night before bed, Ryan grabbed his mic mum and told her, "I think I used to be someone else." He remembered a big white house and a swimming pool. It was in Hollywood. He had 3 sons, but he couldn't remember their names. Ryan started crying when he couldn't remember his sons' names. His mum then did some research into reincarnation in Hollywood and bought a bunch of books on it. One day when flipping through one of the books, Ryan pointed to a black and white picture from a 30s movie called Night After Night and pointed to a man in the photo and said, "That guy's me, I found me." The picture was then sent to a few film archivists before the man was identified as Martin, an extra in the film. Ryan's family flew to California to meet Martin's daughter, and everything he had said about her dad was 100% true. Martin was a Broadway dancer, agent, and more, and yes, he did have 3 sons and a daughter. Coming in at number 9 is Dorothy Eady. Born in January of 1904, Dorothy's family lived in the Blackheath area of London. When she was 3, Dorothy had a bad fall down the stairs and her pulse stopped. She was declared dead but miraculously came back to life an hour later, but this step into the afterlife left her different. Dorothy started having dreams and visions of a large columned building and kept saying she wanted to go home. When she was home, she was born in Blackheath and was still there. A year later, the family took her to the British Museum, and when she saw pictures of Egypt, she immediately said that was home. She felt like her visions were so real that in 1933 she moved to Egypt to be with her husband. They ended up getting divorced, but she stayed in Egypt working as a folklorist. It's believed in her previous life she was a woman called Bentraisht, an orphan who was adopted by the temple of Komel Sultan. Dorothy claimed she didn't remember ordinary life, meaning most of her life was spent inside the temple. She also said she was King Seti's lover and that he got her pregnant, and instead of ruining his life and reveal that he's the father, she just committed suicide, which is not the best way out. At number 8 we have Shanti Devi. Born in India back in 1926, Shanti started going to school at the age of 4, and that's when certain flashbacks and visions started coming back to her. She started saying she was from Mathura and that you could find her husband over there. The 4-year-old girl apparently has a husband, okay. She also said she gave birth to a son, but that she ended up dying 10 days later. Shanti was so desperate to know whether these visions were real or not that she even tried to run away at the age of 6 to try and go to Mathura. The case was so well known that Mahatma Gandhi himself set up a commission just to investigate it. They found a merchant in Mathura whose name was Kedar Nath, and he told them that his wife Lugdi Devi had died 9 years ago, 10 days after giving birth to their son. Shanti knew a lot about Kedar and Lugdi's life together, and even Kedar was convinced that Shanti was Lugdi's real reincarnation. She knew about their life in that much detail. Can you imagine? So much detail that the husband was like, "Yes, this is my wife." Filling at number 7 slot is James Leininger. 2-year-old Louisiana kid James was always obsessed with his toy planes, but at one point he started having terrible nightmares of being in a plane crash. He'd scream while still asleep, saying things like, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out," and he would kick and thrash around in bed. Even during the day when he was awake, he would crash his toys into furniture around the house and yell, "Airplane crash on fire." When his parents finally confronted him, he said he had been a pilot and that he had flown off a boat. Apparently it was called Natoma, and so his dad said that sounds Japanese, to which James said no, it's American. James went further and said he piloted a Corsair plane and that his nickname had been Little Man. These aren't just visions, this is proper detailed recall. After doing more research, his dad found out that there was an American aircraft carrier called the USS Natoma Bay, and the mission had lost 1 pilot, James Huston. And the death was exactly like James had said, exploding, then crashing into the water and sinking. It's also very sus how they have the same first name. Just saying. Now number 6 is the elephant. This one's actually sad and comes from Redditor Hunair, whose younger brother would always talk about his past life. When he was about 4 or 5, he would tell them about his life in India, the street he lived on, what he did, and so on. Intricate details that he just couldn't have made up. He also told them that he died when an elephant crushed him and would cry for hours about how much blood there was. And every time he finished crying, his body would be freezing to the touch. And keep in mind, this 5-year-old had never even seen or been exposed to death or that much bleeding, so I mean, where did he think of that? Coming in at number 5 is Sam. So a couple thought their 2-year-old son Sam was a bit of a genius. By 18 months he had been speaking full sentences, so it's like, wow, are you the next Albert Einstein? No, he isn't. Sam started saying weird shit Like, when I was your age, I changed your diaper to his dad, Ron. Ron just assumed he had misheard what Sam had said and just smiled and nodded, kind of like those penguins in Madagascar. But as the months went on, Sam continued to say weird things to the point Ron and Kathy started piecing it together bit by bit. They concluded that Sam may be Ron's late father. They asked him how he came back and he said, I just went whoosh and came out the portal. And which 2-year-old knows the word portal? Come on now. The next question was whether he had any siblings, and Sam said he had had a sister who turned into a fish. Some bad guys turned her into a fish and she died. And it was true, Sam's granddad had a sister who was murdered and found floating in San Francisco Bay. Sam even knew how his own granddad had died, a cerebral hemorrhage. Imagine losing your dad, but not really, because your dad is now your son. At number 4 are the Pollock twins. I feel like this story has been shared many times on the channel, but only because it's so damn extraordinary. This story is strange because these English twins are actually the reincarnations of their 2 dead sisters. Jacqueline was 6 years old and Joanna was 11 when they tragically died in a car crash. But fast forward a year, their parents had a pair of twins called Jillian and Jennifer. Why did all their names start with a J? It's like the Kardashians. Anywho, Jennifer had a white scar on her head, which Jacqueline had had as well, which she had gotten after a bicycle accident. When the twins were both young, the family moved town for 4 years, and when they came back to their hometown, they were able to recognize a majority of the town, and this would have been fine, you know, maybe the kids had crazy good memory, but the twins had never even been to these places before. They thought Jacqueline and Joanna's school was their own, and they could name all their sisters as toys as well. After the age of 5, they forgot all those memories, but people coined them as complete proof of reincarnation. Filling at number 3 slot is the Marine. I feel like war veterans get reincarnated a lot, or is it just me? There were so many stories I read of kids remembering themselves fighting in one war or another, so it's like, is there a correlation here? Like this story, for example, shared by Redditor Rutherford23. She shared that her oldest son was named after a Marine who was on her husband's last deployment. Apparently he had died on that deployment, but her son had no idea about any of that. One day, as they were all driving to the user's sister's house, they happened to pass the military base where the veteran's namesake was buried. When her son saw it, he said, I'm buried over there. The parents were like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? And their 3-year-old son says, I'm buried over there in the ground, you know, from when I died when I was fighting bad guys with daddy, before I was your kid. Mind you, they had never driven to this side of the city before or even spoken about the Marine he was named after. Now at number 2 is China. This one's from Redditor Hi Dingo Doo, who said they remember when they had just learned to speak in full sentences and would walk around the house with this huge cloth bag. Anytime his mum asked him what the bag was for, he would say for delivering messages, like I did in China, despite not having any relation to China or even being Chinese. This sort of thing became a recurring thing in the house, and the user would mention intricate details about his life in China and that his English name had been Bob. Alright Bob, carry on. And finally, at number 1 is the burning. This one just plain ominous, and I would be scared of my daughter if she said this to me. I'd be like, or finished for you. No, I'm kidding. That was savage. Shared by BuzzFeed user Very Angry Goose, she said that when her daughter was nearly 4, she was playing with her toys on the floor one day, and then she turned to her and said, Mama, I need to tell you something. So obviously the user was all ears like any parent is when their infant child wants to share something with them. Her daughter then goes, before I was me and before you were my mama, I burned. And the user was like, what do you mean? Why would a 4-year-old even know what being burnt meant? She continued and said, my old mama tried to get me out, but the door was stuck. My skin looked weird. Can you imagine that? Your kid remembering they burned alive in their past life and that their mum couldn't save them. Scarring. Traumatic. More tragic adjectives.
And at number 10 with Colton Burpo. And he was able to take a glimpse at what a past life was like and also what heaven is like. When Colton was 3 years old, his mother realized he wasn't feeling well, so she took him to the emergency room. She was told that he had influenza. As time passed on, Colton kept throwing up and his mom knew something more was going on with him, so they went to another emergency room, and that's when Colton was diagnosed with appendicitis, and he needed an emergency appendectomy. If he didn't have this operation, he would have died. Months after surviving the emergency surgery to remove his appendix, Colton started to share a story on how he left his body during surgery and he went up to heaven. He began to describe events and people that seemed impossible for him to even know about. He knew about his past as well. Somehow he knew that his mom had a miscarriage with his sister, and he knew a great amount of information about his great-grandfather who died 30 years before he was even born. Colton's dad actually came out with the book. The book is titled Heaven is for Real, and it actually turned into a successful movie with the same title.
Did you know I have a sister?
You didn't know that Cassie's your sister?
No, I have 2 sisters. You had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you?
Honey, who told you I had a baby die in my tummy?
In heaven, this little girl came up to me. She told me she died in your tummy.
Number 9. Oprah Winfrey, back in 1994, had an 11-year-old boy named Chase who recalls living a past life as a Civil War soldier. He was able to go into great detail about his past life. Ever since Chase was 5 years old, he was able to recall all of his memories from the past. The Civil War was from 1861 to 1865, so clearly it's impossible that he lived during that time. Chase would draw and write down what he remembers of the Civil War from what he says are his own experiences. Apparently his mom had all of Chase's drawings and descriptions checked by war experts, and they were able to match the description.
See, right around here is where I was shooting into the valley, and I was shot by someone right around here.
Is this real life right now? I would be so freaked out if my kids started talking about a past life in like so much detail. It kind of makes you wonder if Colton and this kid Chase, if they actually did live a past life. Moving into number 8, things get really intense with this one. This right here is Cade. When Cade was 3 years old, he started to have nightmares. Nightmares about falling, his leg being broken off. Then he would start drawing his dreams. It would start off with lightning, which then turned into buildings, and it wasn't just one building, it was 2 of them. All of a sudden, Cade drew a plane going towards these 2 tall buildings.
I did begin to think he was describing 9/11.
Did Cade used to be a 9/11 victim who came back to life?
Tell me we don't die and that he picked me. He would tell me that he chose me. He would tell me he was older than I was.
Now at number 7, we have another woman who was on the Oprah Winfrey Show when she talked about her 2-year-old girl on how she's been talking about how she died in the past.
Tia says that when her daughter Leah was 2 years old, she talked with amazing clarity about how she had died underwater. Is that true?
So apparently the little girl remembers getting into a bad car accident where she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And she flew out of the car and off of a bridge into the water where she hit her head on rocks. And the little girl went into detail about how she could see bubbles rising in the water.
I said, well, who was driving the car then? And she said, I was big, I could reach the pedals. And she has no clue that you need pedals to drive a car. She's 2, she's in the car seat.
I mean, this woman could be making up this whole story to get on national TV. I mean, it kind of worked. I mean, I for sure have seen crazier things that people did for attention. I would want to hear this from the little girl's mouth herself to see if this is even remotely true, but then again, the mother could have even trained this girl on what to say. But if this is a true story, that is really freaky because they did find the exact same bridge the girl died at. Number 6.
Mom, my mom died. I said, your mom died? He goes, yeah, my mom died.
So that was Tina Marie Diaries, who told the story when her 3-year-old son was telling her about a previous life. A life where his mom died and then he was reincarnated and came back to life.
Oh my God, that is so freaky. Oh my God, I had goosebumps. Oh my God.
You guys can go watch the full video if you guys want. I'll put a link down there, but the title is called My 3-Year-Old Son Tells Me About His Past Life, bracket true story. And in the comments, I couldn't believe it, but hundreds of people were actually talking about their own experiences with their own kids or someone they know who has experienced this like past life. There seems to be a pretty big and strong community out there who talk about reincarnations. So I guess in the comment of this video, let me know if you guys have a story, or were you guys reborn again, and what memories do you have, or just make something up in the comment section. I don't know. Let's move on to the story of Nicola in at number 5. This is a little girl from the UK who claims she has lived a different life, a life where she was killed by a train. Her mom kept asking her questions like, what was your previous name, or where did you live? Well, she wasn't able to remember her own name, but she was able to remember her father's name. His name was Thomas Benson, and she had a mom and 2 sisters. Nicola believed that she was a boy in her past life, and she does remember which town she lived in. Well, they visited this small town Nicola claims to have lived in, and the mother wanted to go through the church's book to find out if there were any Bensons.
The church records clearly show that a male child was born in that parish to parents of the name Nicola remembered. The date was 1875.
So they found the exact name of the person. The mother dug up some more just to have more answers, and in an archive she found that this family did have 2 daughters. Nicola was taken back to the train track where her accident happened, and she was asked to explain what happened.
I was running over here and the dog went over here and I just got my foot stuck down there and this train was coming and it knocked me over.
From there, let's move on to number 4 with Sam, a young boy who might actually be his own grandfather. I mean, this sounds so confusing. What is going on here? Well, a year and a half before Sam was born, his grandfather passed away. This crazy phenomenon started when Sam was just 18 months old. When his father was changing his diapers, Sam said, "When I was your age, I used to change your diapers." I would be freaking out, like, what the heck are you talking about? I know the idea of reincarnation has been around since 800 BC, but I don't think I can wrap my head around it. Scientists have actually been studying the survival of consciousness. So did this grandfather pass away and become Sam? Sam was able to point things out in pictures that he's never seen before. He was able to identify his grandfather.
Those are pictures Daddy brought back from Grandma's funeral.
That's my car.
The family started to test Sam with the picture to see how much memory of his grandfather he actually has.
Do you recognize anyone in this photo?
There I am.
No, Sammy, that's your grandpa when he was a boy.
No, that's me.
Number 3, we have Cameron Macaulay. We've talked about him many times on this channel from other lists that we have done. This kid was featured in a documentary titled The Boy Who Lived Before. I've watched it many times. I watch it like a couple times a year. It's really interesting, but it gives me the creeps.
Together with psychiatrist Dr. Jim Tucker, Cameron and his mum are going on a search for evidence of his past life. Are there rational explanations for the remarkable coincidences which follow?
So Cameron told his mom that he has lived a past life and he has all the memories of it. He would talk about how he had brothers and sisters and he lived on the island of Barra. But they currently live in Norma, Glasgow. Ever since Cameron can talk, he would describe his past life.
I lived in the White House with my mum and dad and my 3 brothers and sisters.
His stories have never changed over time, they've only become more detailed. Finally, the mother decided to go to this place, Barra, the place that Cameron keeps talking about, and they went, and everything that he said about the place turned out to be true. I don't know how I feel about this. Next up, number 2, we have Barbro Karlin, who is a Swedish writer who actually remembers her past life as Anne Frank. And yes, we're talking about the famous Anne Frank, who wrote about her experiences of the Holocaust. I know Barbara isn't a kid on this list, but she was just 3 years old when she started having these experiences and dreams about being Anne.
I told my mother that my name was not really Barbro, it was Anne.
Barbro stopped acknowledging her parents as her own, and they kept telling them that you're not my parents are gonna come get me soon. As she got older, she was able to give a lot more details about her life as Anne Frank, and in school, Barbara was very confused when the teacher started talking about Anne Frank. She wondered, how does the teacher know so much about her? That's when Barbara was shocked to find out that she was already famous in a past life, and when Barbara went to Amsterdam for the first time, she was able to walk right to the Anne Frank house without getting lost and without directions. When she went into the house, Barbara started to have anxiety, and she was telling her mom that she remembers posters being in her room, but they weren't there. So the mom asked at the Anne Frank house if there used to be posters there, and what they said was mind-blowing. They said yes, they were just putting them in a protective glass casing. I mean, if that's a true story, damn. Finally, at number 1, we have 10-year-old Ryan, who believes he has lived a past life as a Hollywood actor, who then turned into a Hollywood agent. His mom was freaked out, so she reached out to experts for help. For more than a decade, Dr. Jim Tucker, who is an associate professor of psychiatry and the neurobehavioral sciences, took on this case to learn more about Ryan and his claims to have lived a past life. He went through many pictures and finally found a picture who claims is himself. It ended up being an extra in the movie, so this person was very hard to identify. After a ton of investigation, finally the man Ryan pointed to was revealed as a Hollywood actor who turned into a Hollywood agent. In fact, 55 bold statements that Ryan has made about his past life turned out to be true. Some of these statements were he had children, his dad died when he was a kid, he was very rich, he had a swimming pool, worked for an agency, smoked cigarettes, performed on stage, he was married 4 times, he had a piano. I mean, that is absolutely insane. How can this kid know so much about this man unless he used to be this man? It makes you really believe that maybe we are just reincarnations of like someone else. I know for me, I don't have any memories of like a past life I've lived. I can barely remember my own memories. Never mind trying to remember a past life. I mean, maybe I did and I just forgot about it all.